Well, the young man stood before a world that had both revered and dissected every part of his life. A life that from the outside seemed gilded, wrapped in privilege and grandeur. Yet for him, the crown carried with it an unbearable weight. One forged not by just duty, but by the untold traumas that gnawed at him since his earliest years. This was a man who had witnessed the world mourn for his mother's death before he could even process it himself. Those whose every moment was shadowed by the pressures of his royal bloodline, from the front lines of war to the unrelenting glare of the media. His life had been a constant battlefield, both internal and external. But amidst the public roles and royal titles, there was a deeply private struggle, an invisible fight that took place not from the grand stages of diplomacy or military service, but from the caverns of his own mind. The pain of losing his mother, the Prince of Wales, had been compounded by years of internalizing his own emotions. He had been taught, as all royals are, to keep calm and carry on, to hide any sign of vulnerability behind a stoic mask of duty. Yet, as the years went on, the mask began to crack. There was anger, deep, seething anger that manifested in reckless decisions, partying, and even confrontations with the paparazzi. He was drowning in grief, but there seemed to be no place to release it. I was on the verge of punching someone, he later admitted. I was ready to punch someone just because I was so filled with rage. And it wasn't just the media, it was everything. It wasn't till much later, after meeting someone who would become a crucial partner in his journey, both in love and in mental health, that he decided to confront the shadows that had haunted him for so long. Therapy, something previously unthinkable in his world of duty and formality, became his lifeline. Among the many forms of therapy he explored, one stood out particularly transformative: cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT. Rooted in the idea that our thoughts shape our emotions and behavior, CBT offered him a structured, actionable way to address his inner turmoil. But what exactly is CBT, and how did it come to be such a powerful tool in the prince's recovery? The story of CBT begins in the 1960s with Dr. Aaron Beck, a psychiatrist whose groundbreaking work transformed the way people understood and treated mental health issues. Beck was initially trained in Freud's psychoanalysis, but found himself frustrated by its lack of measurable results. He realized that many of his patients' emotional difficulties stemmed not from buried, unconscious memories, but from the distorted ways they thought about themselves in the world around them. In a pivotal moment, Beck asked a patient to describe what she was thinking during a session. Her thoughts, as it turned out, were filled with harsh, negative self-criticism. Beck hypothesized that these thoughts, which he termed automatic thoughts, were the root of her depression. This theory led to the development of CBT, a form of therapy that teaches people to recognize and challenge their negative thought patterns, replacing them with healthier, more balanced thoughts. Through structured exercises, patients learn to question the accuracy of their automatic thoughts, such as, "I'm worthless," or "nothing is ever going to get better." To replace these thoughts with more rational and helpful ones, it's not simply thinking positively, but about thinking realistically and reclaiming control over one's mind. For the prince, CBT had become a revelation. He had been taught to keep his emotions bottled up, but CBT offered him an alternative path. Rather than repressing his feelings, he learned to examine them, question the thought process that led to his explosive anger and profound sadness. "I realized that I wasn't just angry at the media or at the world," he said. "I was angry at myself for not dealing with my emotions sooner." Yeah. Through CBT, he challenged the thoughts that he had once seemed like absolute truths. Thoughts like, "I have to be strong for my family. I can't show weakness," or "I'm trapped by my own royal obligations," were confronted and dismantled. he began to understand that his feelings of inadequacy and helplessness were not permanent realities, but distorted perceptions. The therapy didn't magically fix everything overnight, but it gave him the tools to cope, tools that he had been sorely lacking in his world of tradition and silence. He learned to replace the toxic thoughts with more constructive ones, to allow himself the space to grieve, to give himself permission to be vulnerable. It was a newfound mental clarity that led him to take the boldest steps of his life. He realized that if he wanted to truly break free from the cycle of pain and duty, he would need to make a decision that shook the very foundations of the monarchy. Stepping away from royal life. We didn't walk away, he clarified in later interviews. We stepped back because it was necessary for our mental health. In doing so, he became not only an advocate for mental health, but a living example of the power of taking control of one's own narrative. There's no shame in reaching out for help, he said. In fact, it's the bravest thing that you can do. The man who once lived in the gilded cage of royal duty, who now speaks openly about the struggles and triumphs in the world of mental health, is none other than Prince Harry, Duke of Sussex. Through his journey in the cognitive behavioral therapy, he transformed his life, breaking free from the chains of grief and anger that had long bound him. Prince Harry's story reminds us that no matter where we come from, no matter the pressures we face, we have the power to reclaim our mental health. By challenging the thoughts that hold us back, by seeking help when we need it, we can break free from the cycles of pain and find a path toward healing. So the next time you find yourself in the depths of doubt and despair, remember Prince Harry's journey. You too can confront your thoughts, challenge your emotions, and take back your mental health. Take the brave step toward healing today. Welcome to the Mental Health Janitors, where we help you clean up the mess in your head. I'm your host, Sergeant Q, and with me, as always, Doc Jess.
Welcome, you guys. Thanks for being here.
All right. So we're just coming off of a great live episode that we did last week. Yeah. What are your thoughts coming back into the studio now from doing the live event?
The word that comes to mind is awkward.
Awkward being back in the studio?
Yeah, I loved it. I know we can't do that every week, but I really liked it. I felt like I wasn't talking to a camera.
Yeah, it was different. The dynamic was different. It seemed to flow a lot better. It was nice having an audience there. Here's the negative side. There are no retakes.
Yeah.
So we have to make sure we're super dialed in.
Yes.
Because Casey is sitting over there with a notepad marking the times for all my flubs.
Yeah.
He's going to go back today and fix so we sound super awesome. But you don't get that on the live. So it makes Casey's job a lot easier.
Yeah, kind of.
But our job a lot harder.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that was a really interesting story.
Yeah, it gave me a whole new perspective on why he stepped back. I don't follow the royal family. I don't really get into that stuff. I just knew that he left. I didn't really understand why. But when I did a little bit of research and I looked at some of the interviews where he was talking, I totally made sense why he would step back, why he would do that. And I was like, dude, this is actually pretty brave to step back from the royal family. Where, think about it, I mean, if you're born into that life, you could live your whole life and not really do anything. Just like chill out your whole life and have tons of people wait on you and, show up to some ceremonies and do nothing. And for most people, that's like a dream come true, right? Like, oh, I wish I was part of the royal family. Yeah. They make whole movie series.
So they think. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But so when he was talking about his struggles and why he stepped back from that lifestyle, I was like, oh, okay, this makes a lot more sense.
Yeah.
Now, we talked before about CBT and last week about CBT and how that came about and how it's helpful. So we talked about CBT and getting help and therapy, but in this situation, with him being so prominent out there, and there's this whole image of the royal family, how do you think that dynamic plays into the CBT? Because he's got to overcome more than just the trauma, but now he's got all these expectations and all of these things that are duties that he has to perform when it comes to being part of the royal family.
Right. And that's where it can get a little tricky as well, because what is the cliche or popular saying of with privilege comes responsibility.
Right.
Right. And so there's a lot of privileges of his life, which also then come a lot of responsibilities. And so when some of the things he quoted in the story of having to restructure some of his thoughts of, I have to be strong for my family. You kind of do have to be strong for your family in that kind of role. Mm-hmm. But to what extent? Is it debilitating kind of strength you feel like you need to have for your family? And what does strength mean, right?
What does strength look like?
Yeah. Does being strong for my family mean I never show any emotion? Mm-hmm. No. Being strong is I'm showing this emotion, I'm embracing this emotion, and I'm overcoming this emotion.
Right.
I'm stronger than it.
And I think of all the guys that he served with in the military, and when he can come out as legitimately the commander in chief because he's part of the royal family of this, here's this high prominent guy talking about mental health and talking about needing help and getting it. That is strength, because it opens the door for all of those other guys that he served with or who will serve in the military later. It gives them permission to go get help. And so I saw that as being what does strength look like? That looks like strength to me, because he's changing this, thousands of years of tradition of this very stoic, we don't have any problems kind of perception, which is unrealistic and untrue. Mm-hmm. And he's changing that to, hey, we are still human. We struggle and we go get help, and this is how we do it. He's creating a new mindset for his people.
Yeah. I also think of, I don't know why my mind goes to the Marine. Is it a Marine or Jocko?
Jocko Willink. He's a Navy SEAL.
Navy SEAL. Okay. Mm-hmm. And his, how he took a stand apart from the norm of taking that reckless responsibility for things. Yeah. And what an incredibly brave and strong stance to take, especially when we look at military situations and military leadership in general. And that's also kind of coming out with some vulnerabilities. So these strong, courageous, brave figures coming out with these more vulnerable concepts that, from my perspective, scream strength. Right.
And it's great. If you're not familiar with Jocko Willink, he's a Navy SEAL and he's a commander, and he talks about in his book, Extreme Ownership, and then the other one is The Dichotomy of Leadership. He talks about his failures in there, and some pretty critical failures that I knew about. I didn't know he was a part of it.
Yeah.
But that I knew about, where his SEAL team, they were in a position they shouldn't have been. They decided to change where they were going to set up their OP, observation point, and they ended up going into another battle space that belonged to Anglico. Mm-hmm. And they got in a pretty intense firefight with some Anglico boys.
So friendly fire.
Yeah, because they were in the wrong place and they didn't tell anybody that they had changed. And they got into a firefight, ended up killing
a translator.
Yeah, the translator. Yeah. Exactly. And he took extreme ownership of that and said, hey, this is what happened. This is our fault. And this is how we're going to learn from it. And so it was really, really cool to see him. I had known that story. We all know that story. I just did not know it was him.
Yeah.
And when I read that in his book, it gave me a lot of respect for him and credibility in what he was talking about. It's okay, I can trust this guy because he just laid bare, this is the biggest blunder I've made and it costs lives. And this is what I did to change it. And this is how you can avoid it. I was like, okay, this guy's being authentic and real, and I can appreciate that. And now I want to hear what he has to say.
Yeah. So I feel like a good balance of the two, recognizing, right, that I have some mental health things that I would like to overcome while taking accountability, right? Because a lot of the times we can go to the extreme of the mental health side, and I see this, and make excuses for our actions because we have mental health challenges, and that can also be harmful as well. And so I just like how strong leaders come out and say, hey, I'm struggling with this, and this is the accountability I'm taking for it.
Yeah, it opens the door for everybody else to get help instead of suffering in silence. And that's a real big part of leadership, is clearing a path that others can follow behind you.
Yeah.
And I think that Prince Harry really did a good job of that with speaking openly about mental health.
Yeah. Well, and we're always talking about how scripture aligns with psychology today, right? And
Absolutely.
There's so many places in the good old book, the Bible, that talks about sharing our burdens with one another.
Right.
Being open about those things. The one scripture that I really love is Matthew 11:28-30 that says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I'm gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest in your souls." You can't really go through hard things without sharing them with at least the Lord, and if not other good, solid people around you.
Yeah, it reminds me in Ecclesiastes says 2 are better than 1 because they have a good reward for their service. It's telling us that we need to be working together if we want to really have success. It says, for if one stumbles, his brother is there to lift him up. But woe to the man who is alone when he stumbles, for there is no one there to help him. It's telling us that we need to have people in our lives that we trust, that we can share these things with, that can help us, and then we can help them as well.
Yeah.
All right,
Got our
Jess,
handy dandy cards.
let's do our cards. So we did something a little different on the live where we had some trivia for the mental health janitors, and then Casey had some cool trivia as well. So you guys check that out on the live. You're going to love it. All right.
Did you hear that, Jess? He thought it was cool.
Of course you did.
Oh, you didn't like those?
No, so boring. Trivia. Do not invite me to trivia night. I am not a trivia night. Let's go skating.
Break a hip.
Break a hip, old man. Okay, what food should you buy if you want it to last a lifetime?
Twinkies.
That's what everybody thinks, right?
So what food would you want to buy if you want it to last a lifetime?
6.5 hours later.
It's military MRE. Because they start out bad.
Not the chili mac. I love chili mac.
It's like the 4 fingers of death over here.
Oh, and I used to trade anything to make me a peanut butter and jelly.
Okay.
Pound cake. Ooh, the pound cake was so good.
Yeah, but not the chocolate mint.
No.
That was a gut
The lemon.
bomb.
The lemon was...
Yeah. Oh.
We should eat an MRE on here.
No, we should make Casey eat an MRE.
I'm sure he has. Okay, what's your answer? Your final answer is a Twinkie?
No. I don't know. I can't think of it. I had it on the tip.
Do you know it, Casey?
I don't.
Honey.
Oh, yes.
That's right.
It can be thousands of years old, dating back to the days of Egyptian pharaohs, and still be edible.
That's so true. That wasn't what I was thinking, though, but that is so true. I've seen that where they've unearthed clay pots
with honey
and still had honey inside of it, and it's still good. So, Jess, what tool did we use last week?
Yes. So last week we talked about the foundations of cognitive behavior therapy, the foundational part of the what we call the cognitive triangle. And that's where the automatic thought then leads to a feeling or emotion. And then that feeling or emotion turns into a behavior. And on its way to the behavior, we have a physiological response in our bodies. And then we touched on a couple of the most common cognitive distortions. And so those cognitive distortions, catastrophizing and emotionally reasoning, things like that, please go back and look at that video. But I can see how Prince Harry was struggling with some of those cognitive distortions. And one of those tools is what we call cognitive restructuring. And so this is identifying and challenging negative or distorted thoughts and replacing them with more balanced, realistic ones. And it's really important to know that, like, as Q was talking about, Sergeant Q was talking about, it's not about just the power of positive thinking.
No.
And this is something I touched on at the live as well, is I can replace thoughts all day long, but sometimes it takes a little bit more of unpacking what that cognitive distortion is rooted in. So you go through the process of really truly being convinced that it's not real and convinced of a more realistic one. So a cognitive distortion could be when if a guy asks a girl out on a date and she's like, oh, no, thank you. And his cognitive distortion is, oh, it's probably because she thinks I'm ugly. That's called mind reading. And that's a cognitive distortion. When if we were to break it down and say, is that the only possibility of her saying no? Absolutely not. She could be dating somebody. She could be moving in 72 hours and doesn't want to get involved with somebody. She could like not boys. I don't know. She could be celibate for a little while because she's trying to grow closer with the Lord. There's lots of other opportunities or options for her to say no thanks to the date.
Yeah, there's in your brain when you have thoughts, feelings, and emotions. So when you have a thought, your brain produces a peptide. That peptide comes out. Then your brain releases a chemical. The chemical is attached to an emotion. So the chemical release, that physiological response, is the chemicals in your brain get released and they attach that peptide. So the thought becomes a feeling and an emotion, and that chemical is attached to it. Now that goes into your brain, into the hippocampus, which is the storage area for all of your memories. Now it becomes a memory. So you had a thought, and then a feeling or an emotion releases that chemical. It attaches to the peptide. That gets put into the storehouse of your brain. So then when you think back on these things, when you recall these things, especially if they're traumatic, when that thought gets brought up, it's not just the thought that comes back up in the memory, but it's also the feeling and the emotion. And that brain says, oh, this is the chemical that's attached to this thought. So let's release a whole bunch of that back into the brain.
And that's why 87% of our automatic thoughts come from past experiences, because that's just how our brain works.
Here's a great example. I had a friend that wanted to have coffee with me. And I see this guy all the time at church, and he's like, hey, I want to have coffee with you and another one of our friends. I was like, oh, that's kind of odd. He's never asked me to coffee before. I know this guy for years. And so last night I'm brushing my teeth and I'm getting ready for bed. And I tell Holly, like, hey, this guy wants to have coffee with me and our other friend this morning. She's like, oh, what happened? I thought, I don't know. What did happen? And then all of these times where other people have come to me, like, hey, I want to have a conversation with you, where it's like they could be having cancer, they could be getting a divorce, they could have just lost a loved one, they have a problem with me. So all of these things start flooding back into my brain of all these past experiences where somebody's like, hey, I haven't seen you in a while, let's go have coffee. And it was not good. And I didn't even recognize it because I'm brushing my teeth. My watch goes off.
Because your heart rate went
and
up.
tells me that I'm stressed out. Let's try some breathing exercises. True story. This happened to me last night.
Nice.
And I was like, oh my gosh. And so I did. I stopped brushing my teeth and I just sat there and I'm breathing. And Holly's like, are you okay? I'm like, I will be in a minute. And she's like, what happened? And I told her what happened. And then I was a little worried about it. Like, oh my gosh.
Did you have coffee?
I had coffee with him. He's fine.
Oh.
He's telling me he just bought a new house and he's starting a business. I'm like, dude, right on.
Nice.
But because my past, she's like, what happened? What's wrong? I was like, I don't know. And the brain's like, I don't know. What are all the possibilities of wrong things that could be happening?
Yeah.
Which hadn't even crossed my mind. It was just like, oh, he wants to have coffee. But then when she said, what's wrong? My brain said, let's find out. Yes. And immediately it pumped up into my watch and told me that I was stressed out. I mean, but that's what happens, right? I didn't even notice it. The watch picked it up.
Yay, technology.
Yeah, picked up the physiological changes in my system to tell me that that was causing me anxiety. And I'm glad I did that because I would have went to bed like that and it probably would have caused me to
sleep.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. So I was able to go through that little exercise and bring myself back down and emotionally regulate myself.
Yeah.
But that's what happens. So when you have these thoughts, feelings, and emotions, they are physical parts, chemicals that are attached to peptides, which become memories, and it gets recalled. And that is what you have to replace. You have to reestablish a better way of thinking, a new emotion attached to that thought.
And that is what we call magnification or catastrophizing.
Yes. That's exactly
and
right.
that's a cognitive distortion. And so what you could do in a moment like that, if the breathing doesn't help, you could start a cognitive restructuring activity or...
But that's what we're going to talk about next episode, right?
Yes.
So we're not going to get into that today, but on our next episode, that's what we're going to talk about is that cognitive restructuring.
Yes. And we're going to talk specifically on cognitive restructuring surrounded by our identity.
Right.
So, okay. Right. But another tool that is very common with cognitive behavior therapy is behavioral activation. And this is just encouraging positive activities to improve your mood, to break the cycle of depression and inactivity in your life. And so when you feel like going back to one of those negative coping skills, when you're feeling low, it's just doing a behavioral activation, even if it's 20 jumping jacks, even if it's 5 push-ups, even if it's just going outside, rain, snow, sunshine, whatever, and doing a 5-minute breath work outside, some kind of behavioral activation that's going to hijack that autopilot of wanting to isolate, go get under the covers, and just kind of sit in that depression pity party.
And a great example of this are people who want to stop smoking. So when they feel that craving to smoke, they can't just be like, oh, I'm not going to smoke. They have to replace that with something positive, and they have a much better success rate when they have that craving to use that nicotine. They do another activity instead. So you can't just take something away. You need to replace it with something positive that's going to help you have long-term success.
Yeah.
Because just stopping doing something isn't enough. It seems like it is, but it's not. You have to replace it with something positive. And we have a scripture verse actually that talks about that. And I cannot remember the address. So do you have, Casey, do you have your phone?
I don't.
Okay.
I have the Google.
Where it talks about there was a demon and the strong man who was protecting his house. And the demon comes in, he casts him out, he cleans the house, but then he leaves. And when he comes back, the demon comes back with 7 more powerful.
That's in Matthew.
What's the address for that? Because that's a great example of we can't just stop inactivity. We have to replace it with something positive. Otherwise, it's going to continue to gnaw at us and come back. That's right. It'll continue to gnaw at us until we finally give in. For me, it was stress eating while I was working at my desk.
12:43:45.
Matthew?
Yep.
Good job, Jess.
I mean, I was gonna say that, but I didn't.
Oh, stop it.
So, Jess, what you said is Matthew 12.
Nope, it's not.
No.
That's a good person produces good fruit.
No. When the unclean spirit has gone out of a person, it passes through.
Matthew?
Yeah.
12?
12:43.
43. I thought you said 33. Okay. Yeah.
So, Jess, you said it's in Matthew.
Matthew.
12,
Casey told
40.
us 12:43 through 30. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. It says, when an evil spirit leaves a person, it goes into the desert, seeking rest, but finding none. Then it says, I will return to the person I came from. So it returns and finds its former home empty, swept, and in order. Then the spirit finds 7 other spirits, more evil than itself, and they all enter the person and live there. And so the person is worse off than before. That will be the experience of this evil generation.
So think about that. Think of addiction. People who've tried to kick addiction, or people who've tried to kick the criminal lifestyle. And then they come back and they haven't filled their life with good people. They haven't filled their life with good activities. So then they just end up falling back into those same old patterns again.
Yeah.
And it talks about that right in scripture. And that's a good lesson for us today, is that when you want to stop doing something, you have to replace it with something positive to fill that space, so it's not a void that eventually that bad habit gets sucked right back into.
Yeah. And if we're going to be vulnerable today, like we were on our live, I was able to read another portion of my book, and that was great. And it was beautiful. And it was also really tough. And so afterwards, that whole day, my husband noticed, hey, you're pretty triggered. Don't forget, you read your part of your book, right? Because he's like honed in on me and my irritabilities. And I had an old urge to want to have a couple drinks.
Oh.
And I was like, this is really weird. It's like, why can't I get this? Because it's been a very long time since I've resorted to that. And it kept coming in and it kept coming in. And I'm like, what is going on? And so I put my running shoes on and I put my headphones on. I said, I'm going for a walk. And I walked for an hour. And then when I got back, that craving was gone. And so my behavioral activation was to replace those bad coping skills with more positive ones.
That is a great example, Jess. That's exactly what I was talking about. That's perfect.
Perfect.
Almost like you planned it, but you didn't. You just
didn't. Yeah.
Wow. Great job.
Thanks.
All right. Well, we love having you guys. We love spending time with you. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Share this with your friends and family. Help them take control of their mental health journey. And if you love this content, I'm going to be putting on a free webinar next month where you can invite your friends and family, join me for an hour. I'm going to show you the top 3 things you can do right now today to take control of your mental health journey. Because we love to do 3 things here, right, Jess?
Educate,
empower, and encourage you on your mental health journey. For the Mental Health Janitors, I'm Sergeant Q.
I'm Doc Jess.
And we're out.